Welcome back to Finance in Motion. My name is Adamo, your personal financial planner, and as always, my goal is to help build your wealth and help you sleep well at night. Today's video is going to be about a topic that is a little bit less about a financial strategy or financial topic as I usually do. It's essentially going to be called How to Exit the Rat Race. So I came up with this idea for this video based on a book that is a very famous book. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert T. Kiyosaki. I recommend this book to almost anyone, whether you're interested in finance, whether you're not. It's a book that helps question where you're headed in life and essentially ties into the expression that we call the rat race. We've heard this before, we've discussed this before on how society keeps us in a rat race. And is there a way that we can get out of such a rat race? And this book is highly recommended. It's a book that's over 20 years old, has sold millions of copies. The premise of this book is that the author has a rich dad and a poor dad. His biological father is quote unquote the poor dad and his friend's father is the rich dad. So in the book, there's a dichotomy at play between the advice that he gets from his rich dad, which is someone who's an entrepreneur, who's gotten out of the rat race, who thinks as the rich do, and I'll show you that in the video. And then the poor dad, who's a highly educated father, worked hard, followed the rules from his parents and teachings from his parents and society, and never felt like he got ahead. So it's an interesting life lesson in terms of how do we exit the rat race and what that rat race means to each of us. So as always, I set up my board as issues, action, and results. The first part will be the issues, and they are as follow. So what's the issue at hand with exiting the rat race? What's the thought process and feelings that we get when we think about the rat race that we're in? So it's unmasking the human pitfalls that keep people trapped. And trapped meaning financially trapped. So we've all felt financially trapped or in a job that we don't like, with a boss we don't like, we don't have flexibility, we don't feel like we're getting ahead of our bills and our expenses, and we don't feel like we're headed towards the financial freedom that we want. As a financial planner, our goal is to talk about and help clients get towards retirement, but I choose to use financial freedom as something that's a lot more pertinent and applicable to clients' lives. So the earlier I can get you to financial freedom, the more you can focus on doing what you want to do in life instead of having to trade your time for a paycheck. That's a big life lesson that I'll teach you in the 6 lessons that the rich avoid and the things that they focus on. So essentially, how do we avoid these pitfalls? And then 6 key lessons of the rich. So what are the rich doing or the wealthy doing that the middle class is not doing, and hence keeping us in the rat race? So the first key lesson of the rich is that the rich don't work for their money. So when we think about that, it's kind of confusing in the aspect of saying, well, how do the rich make money, right? And how do I get to become rich? The fact of the word rich, I want to eliminate the negative connotation to the idea of rich because it's something that seems so far-fetched for most people. So the point of these lessons is to show how these are actionable lessons that we can employ in our daily lives to get us to a better financial position. Will it get you to wealth and becoming rich? That depends on each individual. The point is that each of the 6 lessons can be applied in your daily lives to get you further ahead to your financial freedom and essentially the happiness, an increased level of happiness in your lives. So the first lesson or the first key lesson is that the rich don't work for their money. And each little bullet point explains the thought process behind that, and I'll go through them. So the first one is that, in essence, savers are losers. In today's reality, if we just save money and put it aside, that money will not grow. And the idea of money growing is key because our money needs to generate wealth. If we look at the cost of living, inflation, more or less 2% a year, if we do not invest that money, if that money just is saved somewhere, it is not growing, it is actually declining at a rate of inflation, number one. Number two, in the savers are losers, is that if we look at the generations previous to the millennial generation or the baby boomers, essentially saving money was a way to protect and have money for the future. The world was a different world back then. Financial realities were different, interest rates were different, growth rates were different, real estate values were different. In today's reality, if we just save our money in guaranteed investments, in interest-bearing investments, we see how low the interest rates are. So we can no longer just be savers, because it will not get us to financial freedom any quicker. So therefore, we must invest. And when I say invest, we must invest in assets that produce income. The key is that as we're saving our money, picture each dollar as a soldier. Okay? Each soldier must be deployed and invested to produce income, because that income needs to be working and generating, being generated while you're sleeping, while you're working, while you're away. So you have to treat each dollar as a soldier that needs to be working for you by creating income in income producing assets. That is the first lesson as to how we move towards financial freedom. Okay? And that is strictly linked to time versus money. The paradox of time versus money is something that most of the middle class is stuck in. Okay? And it's one of the key links to the rat race. Most people get a job once they finish school, get a job once they finish a trade, and all they do is exchange their time for a paycheck. So if we work 40 hours a week, multiplied by hourly rate, and that's the amount of money that we're exchanging our time for. So we each are agreeing to exchange money for a belief of what our time is worth. In doing so, we are always directly linked to the rat race. Why? For the point that comes right after. The more we earn, the more we consume. Everything in society is linked to consumption. So in essence, when we get our money, so this is once we save, but if we look at the steps before, we earn a certain salary, right? Part of it goes to taxes, to the government, which we have no choice. Then we go to fixed expenses, right? So our rent, our mortgage, so on and so forth. The issue is that what we should be doing next is we should be saving. The issue is that most people don't do that, and they do this instead. So they'll do this first and this second if there's any money left over. And a lot of us blame ourselves for doing this, but it's society's structure and the way marketing is geared towards us that helps us consume. And as we increase our salary and as we move up the corporate ladder, the rat race becomes all the more of an entrapment feeling. Why? Because we earn a higher salary and therefore we increase our consumption almost proportionally to the increased salary. We buy a bigger home, we buy a bigger car, we take better vacations, we go to restaurants that are a little bit more expensive. And therefore the net delta, the remaining money for saving, is virtually the same as when you had your previous salaries. So big issue here is that consumption needs to come after taking care of fixed expenses and after saving, which is not the case for most people. Why? Because the more I save and the less I consume, the more I can invest in income producing assets that create income while I sleep. Example, real estate. Example, a business on the side, so on and so forth. The last point that I'll mention in the first lesson is the burn rate. Okay, so the burn rate, what does that mean? It's your fixed expenses, your cost of living in essence. So what does it take for your household, whether you have a family, whether you're an individual, what does it take for you to live every month? So that's your cost of living. Fixed expenses, you can include variable expenses, savings. So every month I need X amount of money to take care of all my financial matters. And the idea is that the more you protect your burn rate, the lower your burn rate is, the easier it will be to eventually get out of the rat race. For example, if your burn rate monthly, or let's go annually, is $30,000 a year net. So I need $30,000 a year to pay for my mortgage, to pay for my taxes, to pay for some vacations, to pay for food, car expense, a bit of long-term savings, etc. Let's assume $30,000. Well, how can I save money, invest it to create income-producing assets that can help subsidize that burn rate over time? down the road to get to financial freedom, if you can generate $30,000 a year from passive investments, your active job, your salary job, is no longer tied to the rat race. You can then eventually choose to do something that you want to do and not have to exchange your time for money. Lesson number 2 is called financial literacy. So in the book, Robert T. Kiyosaki talks about the fact that his rich dad didn't have a formal technical knowledge in finance, in accounting, taxation, all the disciplines where most people shy away from when it comes to financial independence, or the disciplines that help create financial independence. His poor dad had a lot more knowledge in it because he went to university, highly educated, read a lot. However, rich dad was far more ahead and far more removed from the rat race than his poor dad, who understood all these points. The issue in financial literacy is that rich dad in the book went out and understood that if he did not understand himself something as a concept, he went to learn it. He went to get professionals that helped him understand things like accounting, things like taxation, things like legal issues, things like investing, real estate, so on and so forth. So the key in lesson number 2 is that the rich are financially literate, and if they are not, they hire professionals that are around them to help them become financially literate. Okay? So the issue with financial literacy is that it's a question of interest. A lot of individuals are not interested in the concepts I just mentioned and the disciplines I just mentioned. However, by creating a team around you that are interested in helping you understand these points, you can move towards financial freedom in a much easier and quicker way. So the key points in lesson number 2 are, it's not how much you make or earn, it's how much you keep. So you can make $100,000 a year after taxes to the government, left with more or less $60,000 a year. If you do not save any of that money because you consume it and your fixed expenses are high, so fixed expenses high, variable expenses high, and you do not save, you can be financially literate, you can understand investments, but if you have no money to invest, you're not anywhere further ahead. Once you understand that what you keep are your soldiers that can then work for you, light bulb goes on, and we can definitely use those soldiers to create income producing assets. The second point is that money does not equal financial literacy. So I've seen many clients come to me with inheritances, some lottery winnings, and want to invest that money. So we know the statistics on lottery winners. I'm sure people in your situation or friends and family, you've seen people with inheritances that have spent them. So this point is very, very important. Just because we run into an amount of money does not mean we know what to do with that money. And if we did not come from money, and if we're not financially literate, most likely we will burn through that money. Okay? So this point here is extremely important. We need to use that money to do point number 3, which is we must acquire assets, not liabilities. I'll give you an example. Most people come into an inheritance. What do they first do? Buy a nice car, upgrade their home, better vacations. Those are all, you might think that the home is an asset. The issue is that if that home does not create income, it is an asset, but it's not an income producing asset. It will not help you get away from the rat race. All it will do is shackle you more in the rat race because of higher property taxes, higher heating bills, renovations, so on and so forth. So the key is that if we come into some money, we must acquire assets, and more specifically, income producing assets, plexes, dividend stocks, investment portfolios, etc. Even start a business that creates income as well, patents, so on and so forth. So income producing assets and not liabilities. Avoid the car, the boat, the motorcycle, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so the key to this lesson is financial literacy is very, very important to understand if we do come into money, what we should do with that money. And it's not necessarily how much I earn, it is what I keep, which are my soldiers that I can then action. Here's a visual of assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. So it looks a little bit complicated, but I'll run through the error of most people's ways, which visually keeps them in the rat race, okay? And then I'll explain the little note that I put on the left. So in essence, various assets are real estate, investment portfolios, businesses, intellectual property. Those are assets, okay? Your home is an asset as well. Liabilities, mortgage, credit cards, lines of credit. So those are liabilities, okay, which carry a monthly expense and a cost. Income is in the form of salaries, dividends, rents from real estate properties, and expenses, which are fixed variables. So fixed expenses like your mortgage payment, your rent, taxes. Variable expenses are vacations. You could say certain car expenses if it's a fun car, etc. So those are fixed and variable expenses. Restaurants fall under variable. So you get the idea. So how do people visually end up being stuck in the rat race? So essentially what they do is they collect a salary because we've exchanged our time for money, as I mentioned in lesson number 1. So we have no choice to go to work every day and earn that paycheck for the time given. So we earn that income, which affords us no free time. And essentially what we'll do is most of us will spend it here. So we'll go income, and then I'll start with my fixed expenses, such as my income taxes, things I have no choice to pay, and variable expenses, and then I have zero money left over. So that's the simplest and worst way of operating, because you're absolutely stuck in the rat race. You will never get to financial freedom because you're always living for that next paycheck. The second situation that people will employ or follow is they'll earn that same salary, okay? They'll spend on fixed expenses like taxes, rent, and then they will buy assets thinking that they're assets, but actually they are liabilities, okay? So think of an example. They'll buy a vacation home thinking that it's an asset, but they're really buying a liability, a car that they don't need, a motorcycle, a boat, so on and so forth, okay? So it's better than the first option, but it's still not the best option that's gonna get you out of the rat race and headed towards financial freedom. What the rich do is they take their salary and any other type of income that they have, so dividends from real estate investment portfolios, rents from real estate investments, they'll take these sources of income, okay? So I'll highlight it in a different color here so you see. They'll take these sources of income and they will buy income producing assets, as I mentioned earlier. So they'll buy assets which produce more income to then feed back into here, and with the income from these assets, they will spend on expenses. So what they're doing is that they're taking their money, they're paying their fixed expenses, their income taxes, things they have to pay. They then use those soldiers to buy income producing assets. They start a business. They invest in real estate that creates rental income. They invest in portfolios that create distributions in the form of interest or dividends. And they take that leftover money and they use those soldiers, as I mentioned earlier, to spend on the variable expenses such as a vacation and so on and so forth. Sky's the limit in terms of variable expenses. So in a nutshell, what that means, and if you look at the notes on the left here, is that the rich buy assets, and more specifically income producing assets. The poor buy or have expenses, as I mentioned earlier, there to there. And the key is here, which is where most people fall, is the middle class, which is absolutely stuck in the rat race. They buy liabilities thinking that they are assets. So the biggest issue is that in order for us to spend on variable spending, we must move towards doing that by the income from our income producing assets, not the income from our salary. Because if we keep doing that, we never can step back and invest our time in other areas, such as starting a business, such as buying real estate. If we're constantly exchanging our time for money, we are in the rat race and we will never get out of it. The third lesson of the rich is mind your business. Might sound funny, but what does that mean? In essence, in the book, Rich Dad always focused on creating income producing assets, starting businesses, working on real estate deals with joint ventures. If he didn't have the money, he found people with money and did it together. Any salary or income he created, he would invest it in income producing assets or starting businesses, as I mentioned, or also investing in the markets to create more income and more capital to continue investing in other areas. So what this means is that if we are constantly salaried individuals, in the long-term perspective, it is very, very difficult to get out of the rat race because of consumption, because of exchanging our time for money. So in the end, the quicker you can create something as a side business or a side venture and work for yourself, the quicker you can mind your business, the faster you can create income producing assets and therefore get out of the rat race and financially free sooner. So the key points here are focus on the asset column and focus on income and loop that over and over. What does that mean? I showed it visually here. So what Robert Kiyosaki says in the book is the best advice he got for this key lesson is that the rich take any income that they then use to buy income producing assets, and they never let this money come out. Once you put that $100,000 in a revenue property, for example, they will never remove that money out of that cycle. Why? Because that $100,000 that was used to purchase an income producing asset is always going to produce that income over time. So you can never let yourself take that money out. You must have the discipline to leave that money in and let it continue to create the fruits of your labor. So what he then says is the income from the income producing assets can pay for your luxuries or your expenses. So he gives an example, and this is a bit of an extreme example in the situation because he was far along the process, but he said, my wife wanted a Mercedes. I could not afford a Mercedes. And then when I eventually could afford a Mercedes, I did not want to buy a Mercedes with, for example, the $50,000 that he wanted to use. So in essence, what he did, in the contrary to spending that $50,000 on directly an expense, so income directly to expense, money gone. You just bought a liability, not an asset, as I mentioned earlier. He took that money, invested it in an income producing asset, which over time grew, and he was able to take that income from that asset and pay the monthly payment on that Mercedes. So what he's doing is using the cash payment or the fruits of his labor to pay for that luxury, but the asset and the money used to buy that asset are always there and will always continue to produce the fruit. Picture planting a tree, the tree grows, produces fruits, the tree will always be there, the fruits will always be produced, and you can always eat those fruits. Same idea here. You take every dollar that you earn, after taxes of course, if you're salaried. As an entrepreneur, there's other things you can do, but as a salaried individual, you buy income producing assets, and the income from those assets can pay for your luxuries. That is the best structure when it comes to focusing on assets, income, and doing that over and over and over again. The fourth lesson of the rich is called know how taxes work. Again, most of my clients despise taxes unless they're accountants. So it is not a fun topic to go through. However, anyone who's an entrepreneur understands the power of tax deferral, understands the power of investing through your corporation and through a holding company. The key of being able to defer that taxation and paying less taxes in a company, having more money to invest in income producing assets versus paying yourself that salary at a high or higher tax rate or marginal tax rate, having less purchasing power. The difference between the two is astronomical over time. So if you don't know how taxes work, get a good accountant and have him or her explain to you how taxes work and how you can better prepare yourself to use taxes in your favor. There's a key point that I want to mention that's mentioned in the book and I think is really, really important. Whenever there's a political campaign in the US or in Canada and we see the left and the right talk about income taxes and rising income taxes, lowering income taxes, the middle class, the wealthy, and you hear parties talk about we're going to tax the rich. The sad truth is that the rich will never be the most taxed. Why? Because they understand how taxes work. And also, they lobby governments to create tax incentives and tax loopholes so that they will pay less taxes or defer their taxes in the future. Okay? So it is important to understand that the rich in a Western society, in Western civilization, will never be the most taxed. The population that will be the most taxed is always and will always be the middle class, because the middle class creates the tax basin for governments and government spending. It will not be the rich, simply due to the lobbying power of the wealthy. So if we understand that, we then need to move on to the next point, which is salaried individuals can never defer taxation. So as I mentioned before, through a corporation or holding company, every salary you earn or every income you earn from a job, you're taxed, or every paycheck you earn from a job, you're taxed. You're left with the net. You are not able to defer that money or defer that salary, pay less taxes, and invest thereafter. So you have less soldiers to invest. So that's a key part. So again, it ties into the lesson number 3, which is mind your business. And if you can start a side business or a side venture while you're at work, again, it's very hard to leave a job if you have expenses and if you have a family, of course. But if you can start a side business that grows over time, whether it be real estate, whether it be any type of service or product-driven company, you can eventually create that income, you can defer your taxation, and you can invest more of that money in income-producing assets. I think this summary here, this little quote, I think summarizes this lesson, which is we hear this expression when we come out of school, when we talk to our kids, when just in conversations with people who are salaried, which is, I'm going to climb, or I will climb the corporate ladder, right? To have a higher salary, higher position. Again, more consumption doesn't necessarily get you out of the rat race, right? But the comment posed by the book says, why not own the ladder? So it's such a light bulb moment. What does it mean? It means that instead of exchanging my time for a paycheck, why don't I create my own ladder? Why don't I own my own ladder? Why don't I create my own business? Why don't I buy my own real estate that produces income? Why don't I create enough income that covers my cost of living, as I mentioned earlier, and I don't have to answer to anybody? The advantage of doing that is that we can then defer taxation. We can invest through companies. We can do so many more things that get you out of the rat race and never have to exchange your time for money. Once you own the ladder, whatever that ladder is, whatever that ladder generates for you, the idea is that you want that ladder or that business or that venture that you're into or doing to make money while you sleep. Okay, so those are forms of leverage that we use. Essentially, you make money while you sleep, while you're away. You don't have to exchange your time for that money, and that's the key lesson number 4. The 5th key lesson in the rich or becoming rich is that the rich essentially invest. Might seem very rudimentary and simple, but very difficult to do on a daily basis, especially in our lives if we are caught in the rat race. So the expression goes that it is not always the smartest people that get the money, but actually it is the bold. So fortune favors the bold. We've heard that expression, but in our case here, I'm sure people have seen a smart person that they know, or they themselves feel that they're extremely smart, but are not able to get ahead, or not able to get out of the rat race, or not able to create an opportunity that comes their way. So, and then we see someone who isn't necessarily the smartest person, but they've gotten ahead. They have that real estate portfolio, they have that investment portfolio, they own a certain business, and we ask ourselves, well, how did that person make it if I'm smarter than them? In essence, what it means is that it's not always the smartest people that are able to create that wealth, but it's actually the bold. So having a little bit of drive and risk-taking nature helps us invest. Invest in what? Real estate, starting a business, investment portfolio, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. Okay? And the key, so why do we invest? The key is to always have that goal. Why are we investing? Why do the rich invest? Why do they take those soldiers and have them invest in income-producing assets? It is so that their cash flow be greater than their expenses. If you always keep your cash flow greater than your expenses, you will always create more soldiers or more disposable income that you can then put back in the loop and buy more income-producing assets or create more income-producing assets to allow this disparity or this delta or the cash flow to become greater and greater and greater than your expenses. That is the key. And then eventually down the road, you can start increasing your variable expenses because your cash flow is so high that you can allow yourself some of those luxuries in life. So the key here is that the rich invest. We often think that the rich just spend their money. They do, but they spend it with the income produced from their assets. That is the key. The sixth lesson that I think is really, really important in this book is that work to learn and not for money. So again, it goes back to the idea of you cannot just work for a paycheck, because if you do, you're constantly in that wheel, that hamster wheel or the rat race of working for your paycheck to feed your lifestyle, and you never advance. How do we advance? We need to learn. What does that mean? So more and more, we are seeing the value of becoming a lifelong learner. If we think of automation, artificial intelligence, we're in 2020, we hear more and more of these things replacing jobs, and they will. So how do we insulate or how do we protect ourselves from being replaced or from our value declining? It is by becoming lifelong learners. So gone are the days of going to school, getting a bachelor's degree or maybe a master's degree and thinking that we're done with school and that we can just get into the labor force and earn our income and our paycheck and climb that corporate ladder. Those days are, I believe, gone. We must continue to be lifelong learners. We must adapt to changes in technology. When new technologies come to the forefront, we need to adapt, retrain ourselves, which is the third point, to always stay relevant and have a marketable value in the labor force. So these 3 points are paramount to essentially getting out of the rat race and becoming financially free. We must have a thirst for knowledge and constant learning. We must adapt to changes in technology, and we must retrain ourselves. If we see that we're learning and we notice that we need to adapt, we must retrain ourselves, and we must believe that we can retrain ourselves to be able to get employed or start a business in the fields that are of importance in today's world. The last part that I'd like to talk about are the results, which I show in every video. So looking at all the 6 lessons of the rich in the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, we see that in the end, it comes down to overcoming specific obstacles that are put in our way that help us stay in the rat race. Okay, and you'll see these come up in your personal lives when I go through the examples. So the first one is risk. So most people talk about, I want to avoid risk. I'm not a risky person. If I lose, I'm going to lose my money. I'm afraid to invest. So you've heard all of these things. So it's not about not taking a risk or taking too much risk. The key is to take calculated risk, to manage risk. So if we want to invest in the markets, well, we can invest in something that fits our risk tolerance and manage that risk. If we want to invest in real estate, but we're afraid to get started with a larger building, maybe we start with a smaller building. If we're afraid to do a real estate endeavor or start a business alone, maybe we start with a partner who has some knowledge that you may not have. So it's about managing risk, not avoiding risk altogether. Remember, fortune favors the bold, and bold means managed risk. The second point that is seen very, very often in individuals who are stuck in the rat race is cynicism. We're faced with cynics all the time. People that think that we cannot do it, you won't make it. You hear those negative comments like, oh, really, you're starting that business? Oh, I'm not sure if that's gonna work. So avoiding cynics and cynicism is paramount. Speak to people that you respect. Speak to people that give you advice that is important and relevant to what you're trying to do. Example, you want to start investing in real estate, maybe speak to somebody who has invested in real estate or a real estate expert, as an example. The third one is laziness. So we might think that, oh, most people that are lazy are going to obviously be stuck in the rat race. Quite the contrary. The laziest people are often the busiest people. And what do I mean by that? So in the book, they talk about how busy people are mostly busy with useless tasks. They stay busy in their daily lives to avoid having to take a step back and look at the impact of each task that they have in their lives. So think of a busy person that you know in your lives. It might be yourself as well. Jot down all the things that you do in your daily lives. how many of those are filler activities that keep you busy, but avoid you having to look in the mirror to say, what am I doing or not doing that can help me get out of the rat race? Okay? So quite the contrary, if we're a busy person, that is the point at which I would take a step back and say, am I lazy, not in wanting to work, but lazy in looking at the tasks that I do in my daily life, and the impact that each of those tasks have on the rat race. Am I committing to being a lifelong learner? Am I retraining myself? Or am I just staying busy, working, coming home, spending time with the family, and not taking a step back to do things for myself that help me get retrained or start a side business or invest in real estate, do the research involved, etc. The next point is bad habits. We all are stuck with bad habits. The key in breaking habits is that we must create new habits to replace those habits. Okay? Very, very important that I see some clients that are stuck and they could be mental bad habits. For example, I want to invest in real estate, but I don't want to have to repair toilets or clean toilets or fix toilets. You always hear that example. So that's a bad mental habit of saying real estate equals cleaning or replacing toilets or fixing XYZ that goes wrong. Another bad mental habit is the markets there's going to be a correction. It's going to be the worst case in human history, so I don't invest. Those are lazy, bad habits. And those bad habits, all they do is force your brain or help your brain just basically go to sleep. So it allows you to forego the thought process or the search for better habits and therefore better results. Okay, so very, very important. Look at the habits in your lives, see which ones are positive, which ones are negative, and which ones help you stay in the rat race and which ones help you move away from the rat race. The last one is an important one, arrogance. Maybe yourselves, people in your lives, you'll know people that stick to what they know. I know how to make money in this lane, I will stick to this lane. You can do that. However, what happens when this lane is at risk? Okay? So the idea of being arrogant is in direct contrary it's in the direct path of being a lifelong learner, of retraining yourself, of adapting in the 21st century. So arrogance is the beginning of an individual's demise. Have a level of humility, learn in your lane, learn new lanes so that you can apply those new learnings to create passive income or active income in different lanes to diversify your income stream and help you create that income or income producing assets which help you get out of the rat race over time. So I hope this video helped you understand the 6 key lessons that the rich employ. I highly, highly recommend that you pick up the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. I've included a link in the video at the bottom. So if you click that link, I do get a small referral fee from Amazon if you do purchase the book there. It is a must read. It is an easy read. I would highly recommend that you suggest it to your family, friends, spouses. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. And again, have a great day.